Yesterday, an appellate court in New Orleans heard arguments on a key immigration case that involves the legality of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, better known as DACA, and could determine the future for hundreds of thousands of young immigrants. Now, the Biden administration led an appeal against a ruling by U.S. District Court judge who ruled last year that DACA was illegal. And while the hearing has energized advocates on both sides of the aisle, The Hill's Rafael Bernal reports that it's unlikely to be resolved anytime soon. Rafael joins us now to expand on the case further. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, always great to see you. So tell us what's at stake in this case, and what is the administration's argument, and what's the current legal status?
So the parameters are really, they go from a decision to maintain DACA, saying that if the administration and immigrant advocates get their way fully, the administration would be able to fully re-implement the program, expand it, change it as it sees best, essentially saying that deferred action is a power that the executive has, and that Congress has given the executive broad powers to interpret that deferred action. Now, of course, the flip side of it is a complete termination of the program. Now, that's very, very unlikely to mean that people who currently have DACA would completely just overnight lose their benefits, but it would mean a continued current status where the administration is not allowed to bring new people on board into the program, and and that means people would eventually age out, and DACA would cease to exist over time.
So what do you So what are you expecting to be the outcome of the case? Any hints at that?
Well, it's very clear that whatever happens in the Fifth Circuit, and this could take months to just go through the Fifth Circuit, so we're going to stay the way we are. Whatever happens there, it's going to be appealed, whether it's to the full Fifth Circuit, right now it's just with a 3-judge panel, or whether it's to the Supreme Court. So likely ends up in the Supreme Court. Now, that's where things get a little bit muddier, because yes, there is a conservative supermajority in the Supreme Court, but we saw Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Kavanaugh sided with the liberals in the most recent immigration case. That its similarity to the DACA case is about how much power Congress has given to the executive to interpret immigration law. So really, I mean, I'd say the coin is up in the air on that one. There's and arguments are actually very important in this case.
Well, the executive government has a lot. Congress has the executive branch of government has a lot of power when it comes to immigration. It's one of the few things. Immigrants don't fall under the strict scrutiny or protected classes. Executive government has a lot of unilateral issues. Unilateral power. I know this because I'm an immigrant and I came to America in 2008, and the laws haven't changed. I know it's a popular perception that it's Republicans super against immigration progress, but the Democrats have not been particularly progressive on it either. It hasn't changed much in terms of people similarly situated to me in all of the time I've been in America, in about 15 years. And I find the pushback to DACA particularly troubling, because so often people have this conversation about doing it the right way, right? Not really realizing that, one, most people can't, they don't have a route to citizenship. And I know this as my own self does not have citizenship and does not have a route to applying to citizenship, and I'm someone who came here on a student visa. I'm a lawyer admitted to the courts, and in the case of DACA, that was a route that our government created and gave people this route so that they could get themselves in compliance. So it's interesting to see so many people push back on this and want it gone, and to get rid of these people who rely on DACA. And I wonder the motivation there. What do you think?
I'm right there behind you. I came to this country in 2011, so just 3 years behind you, yes. And in the same process. But yeah, I think the fundamental idea is that Congress has been sclerotic on immigration for 25 years, for 30 years, really. There's no hope that there will be big changes. So the INA, the Immigration and Nationality Act, that we have now is probably the one we'll have for the foreseeable future. So the one motivation, of course, is political. We are in an election year. Tying the defense of DACA to what's going on at the border, as unfair as it may seem to anybody who's really looking at these issues, considering they're completely separate resources. There's
Right.
one government lawyer arguing in the Fifth Circuit is not going to take away from whatever the Border Patrol is doing. But that argument is being made that resources are being driven toward defending DACA rather than driven toward, quote unquote, defending the border.
Right.
So the political motivation is there, and then there are many groups. They're not populist, but they are powerful, who advocate for decreased immigration, who say fewer immigrants are better for the country. Now, most economists disagree with this, most sociologists disagree with this, but those groups exist and they have grassroots power and they have a lot of influence in today's Republican Party. And if the argument is simply fewer immigrants, then litigating against DACA or any other liberalizing immigration program simply just logically follows.
Cancel culture has claimed its most recent victim in Midwest native and New York City newcomer Griffin Green, who has been called the Bodega Bro for his viral TikTok about the lack of full-service grocery stores in the Bronx. Let's watch.
Okay, so I just moved to New York and I'm trying to go grocery shopping, and so I type in like grocery stores on my Apple Maps, and like every one I go to, like I'm walking to, like they're like this or like this. Like, bro, that's not a grocery store. Like I'm trying to get like eggs, yogurt, like cheese, like like that, right? Like look at this place. Hey yo, Ak, let me get a bacon, egg, and cheese. The Aki way. Like, those TikToks? Like, I'm doing it. Like, I've literally been to like 5 of those now. And like, I don't know what the I'm about to do for dinner. Like, where are the Krogers and like the Whole Foods at? Like, I'm about to eat like cereal and ramen for dinner. Like, what the
Green received major backlash online as a result of the video and was fired soon after from his new position at Outreach, a productivity software company. They tweeted, quote, "Thank you for bringing this to our attention. Upon investigation, we took swift internal action in accordance with our company policies and in alignment with our core values."
However, Outreach later told Reason Magazine's Liz Wolfe that Green's employment was terminated for a different TikTok where he allegedly, quote, leaked private and confidential information. Associate editor at Reason Magazine, Liz Wolfe, joins us now to expand on her reporting. Welcome back to Rising, Liz.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Liz, you, like I, have paid close attention to the kind of cancel culture beat, or whatever we want to call it, people getting fired or expelled or whatever for, sometimes juvenile or embarrassing social media behavior, sometimes long ago, sometimes more recent. And yeah, he moved to New York, right, for this job, and then is out of a job immediately for, what I thought was kind of like a fish out of water type routine that, maybe you thought wasn't funny, but didn't look to me like it was designed to be offensive or racist or whatever. But, tell us more about what you said in your piece.
Yeah, so I called Green up and I called the company up because I was interested in getting both sides of the story, and very few people had sort of tracked down any of the parties involved in this. So I kind of wanted to give them a chance to respond. Outreach, the company, in my view, was kind of BSing. They claimed that the reason they terminated Green was because he had shared a confidential offer letter via TikTok. This was something he did share 3 weeks ago. It's not something where you can make out any identifying details about the company. It's nothing more than a generic offer letter. It's kind of absurd to me. There's no real confidential information that is now out in the public circulating. And then they also followed that up with a boilerplate DEI statement to me. And so I was sort of like, well, wait a second. If you're firing him for this very buttoned up formal reason of he shared confidential information, and yet you're also fixing this DEI statement, to me, you're kind of telling on yourself, right? Like you're really reacting to the controversy and to the Twitter scorn. When I spoke with Green, I mean, he noted that it was his second day on the job when he was fired. On one hand, we're libertarians. We believe companies should have the ability to hire and fire at will as they want. But to me, there's something really absolutely odious about this practice of firing people for sort of character-related things as opposed to job performance, which, to be fair, companies have always done this, right? You fire somebody if they sexually harass someone. But this is sort of outside of the company's purview. It's something that the company wouldn't have even known about had pissy people on Twitter not brought it to their attention.
Right. The snitches, the tattletales.
Yeah,
Not
it's
y'all
this
talking about snitches.
like acquiescing to tattletales type thing that's become all too common. And I'm just confused about what incentive does the company have to do this?
Well, first of all, companies fire people, like we've discussed this, companies fire people for any reason, right? Social media policies are not uncommon. I know my job, you say the wrong thing on Twitter, you very much so can get fired. Same thing with even like college admissions. You do something, they see with a red, so look up. People have been fired and let go for all kinds of arbitrary reasons because it doesn't go with the company's policy. So that is not uncommon.
Well, we can criticize them.
Yeah, go ahead. And I'm just telling you my thoughts. And I would push back on me calling this cancel culture. We can't cancel somebody we never had a subscription to. This is a nobody. We don't know this person. This is not a public figure of any kind. This is a regular guy. He put out these videos. People respond. Social media, he's not singled out. Social media responds to everything. If you're the topic of Twitter for the day, you get a viral video, you're going to get responses. So that happens all of the time. And I would push back on, listen, if he feels like he has an employment claim, he feels like this was a wrongful termination, I encourage him to seek an employment lawyer. I am not going to push back on the man's rights to go pursue it however he would like and to feel however he would like about being fired and about the fact that he moved to New York for that. But as far as people's response to it, I know he did say, I'm in the Bronx for a few weeks, so I'm like the only white dude in this whole gym. So I got this NAACP shirt. So these people will vibe with me more. It's not, there are lots of problematic comments made, and I will say this, in terms of New Yorkers are a people, New Yorkers feel very strongly about New York identity, even like outside of race, anything. Bodegas are a central staple to New York City culture. You come for bodegas, they come for you online. Yeah, Andrew Yang can tell you firsthand, you play with the bodegas, you're going to receive the backlash.
That was dumb too, though.
My point is, it happens. He's not, it happens.
Well, it
That's
happens,
life.
but I don't.
Social media is a place.
It shouldn't be life.
If you avail yourself to the public, I don't know what is this world where we think you don't get criticism.
Yeah.
You avail yourself to the public. You put up this video. You did that. That's what happens. You got to be more thoughtful about stuff like that. But like I said, if y'all feel he has a claim, employment lawyer.
I look at it a little differently. So first of all, I totally relate to that. We're both New Yorkers. Also, you can get yogurt and eggs and cheese at a bodega.
Absolutely, Liz. Get him.
Right. But no, to your point about cancel culture, I think it's important to be really clear about what we mean when we talk about this. And this is something that I've covered a lot, Robbie's covered a lot. But you don't have to be a public figure to have the mob come after you and to treat you and expect punishments that are really disproportionate from the offense. I think you're totally right that the rest of his TikTok videos, there's a level of like disturbing naivete and obliviousness and sort of insensitivity that I get from it. To me, that says, idiot from the Midwest who's 22. It doesn't necessarily scream malice to me. And I think there's this problem with a lot of like Gen Z and the sort of TikTok vlogging type thing where they're just putting all kinds of unfiltered thoughts out on the internet. And like, surely some of those things will come to bite them in the ass, right? But I didn't get too much malice from the videos that I watched, and I asked him for access to them. He deleted his TikTok, so I had him send me some of the videos. I even linked out to them via Reason. I really want readers to be able to judge for themselves the sort of severity of the offense. But I think it's important to go back to this idea that you don't have to be famous to be canceled. You can be a regular person and still there's this like virality and this ability for people in numbers to really wield the power of numbers to attack you for things that, yes, were maybe wrong or maybe inappropriate to say, but the actual punishment in many cases is really disproportionate to the offense. And that's something I struggle with. And I struggle with the sort of spinelessness of the employer or the university in these situations who are basically bending to this mob as opposed to in any way trying to define the company values that they claim to hold.
These past several days, massive farmer protests have broken out around the Netherlands. Dutch farmers are protesting new climate regulations that will close farms and force them to kill off livestock in order to curb nitrogen emissions. In response to the new regulations, which I'll explain in a moment, thousands of tractors and trucks blocked roads, distribution centers, and parts of the German-Dutch border. Fishermen have joined in on the protests and begun blocking ports. Freight and dock workers have joined in on the protests as well. Manure has been sprayed in front of some of the government buildings. Media buildings have been blocked with tractors, trucks, and surrounded with poo over reporting that labeled the protesters as extremists and militants. There's talk of airports soon being shut down due to the blockades. Essentially, the Netherlands could come to a standstill. Something has clearly gotten these farmers very angry. So what are these regulations exactly? Well, about a month ago, the Dutch Minister for Nitrogen and Nature Policy presented a national and area-specific plan to reduce nitrogen greenhouse gas by anywhere between 12 and 70%, depending on the area. The farmers in the most regulated areas would essentially be put out of business. And the Dutch government even recognized this when unveiling the plan, saying, quote, "There is not a future for all farmers within this approach." Basically, the government is putting you out of business, and it's all in the name of the environment. Now, we're used to talking about carbon emissions, but next on the chopping block seems to be nitrogen emissions. Nitrogen, which is a key nutrient for plants, is also a pollutant. Fertilizer that washes off the fields can end up in lakes and coastal areas, killing marine life. Airborne ammonia from things like power plants and engines contribute to smog and other environmental issues. But in farm-centric areas like the Netherlands, it mostly comes from livestock urine and manure. Now, in order to reduce nitrogen emissions, you would then have to reduce livestock. This obviously will affect and even put out of business livestock farms, but will also affect other areas of agriculture since many farmers use manure as fertilizer. And if we look to reduce nitrogen emissions, we can expect fewer meat farms and fewer grain farms since there will be fewer livestock to feed. On top of this, artificial fertilizer prices have been skyrocketing lately. With the inability to use manure, those prices are only going to go even higher. Some farms who aren't even subject to these new nitrogen regulations will go under just because of inability to secure fertilizer for their farms. The ones that can stay in operation will, of course, pass those extra costs onto the consumer, driving food prices up even more than they are now. And with less meat on the market, we're looking at a serious price crisis. These Dutch farmers know this, and that's why not only are they protesting, but many are supporting them. The media's attempt to smear them as extremists hasn't worked. Recent Ipsos polls show that the relatively new Farmers' Political Party, formed in 2019, has shot up in popularity over the nitrogen emissions issue. Currently, the party holds one seat in the Dutch parliament, but the polls show if an election were held today, they'd gain 11 more. And more support could be coming. The Netherlands is the second largest exporter of agriculture in the world, behind the United States. And what happens to their farms affects us all. This isn't just a small crisis only affecting Amsterdam. So what's been the reaction by the Dutch government towards the protesters? Well, police have been using tear gas on the farmers, and military tanks have been called in to deal with the blockades. The government has demanded tow companies begin towing tractors, but they're refusing to get involved. The Minister of Agriculture has offered to begin negotiations, but only on the condition the participants condemn the demonstrations. So this battle between farmers and regulations imposed by the government has been going on for the past few years. In 2015, the UN unveiled its 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and in it are aggressive actions to curb climate change. In order to meet the metrics, the Netherlands has been ramping up regulations despite farmers saying they needed time to adapt and to go slow or they will go out of business. The government initially agreed, but then climate activists soon sued and won. As a result, the government has had to go more aggressive against the farmers despite the consequences. And regarding climate metrics, the regulations have worked. The country's nitrogen footprint has decreased over the past 5 years in a row, but not because the farmers are adapting. Instead, since 2017, the pig population has been shrinking because the government has been paying farmers to close their businesses. With the latest round of tightening of regulations, the Dutch government has announced more multi-billion-dollar buyout arrangements, but has also stated they will expropriate the land from farmers who do not comply. They'll take their land. As farms shut down due to either regulations, the government just taking them, or rising costs, we can expect the looming food shortage to get even worse. These farmers protesting are sounding the alarm bell. It isn't just their businesses that will be impacted, it's all of us. Sure, they're worried about their own survival, but maybe all of us should worry when we can't get the food we need because it's either not on the shelf or costs way too much. Now, climate and environment are extremely important issues, and we should always work to improve our planet. But when people can't get to work or put food on the table, the question becomes whether or not we're going about this the right way.